The chat between Preach and Ion Hazzikostas recently was a lot of fun and very interesting, and thank you for both of them for taking part. There are, however, some concerns with Ian's answers that need a cup of cocoa and some talking out. So, let's begin.
When we look at covenants, yes, there are situations where you may wish you had a different tool available to you. Part of the challenge for us is making sure that the gaps are never too large, and that there's never a universal right or wrong answer, where it's like, oh, you're a rogue and you picked that covenant. Yeah, that's just the wrong choice. Like, there's never a situation in which you're going to be happy that you're a member of that covenant as a player of this class. Because, yeah, that's just a trap.
Ian seems to think that Blizzard can balance everything so well that there won't be a best covenant ability for a Fire Mage, or a Holy Priest, or a Blood DK. This is presumably based upon Blizzard's long and storied history of balancing things perfectly in the past.
You serious?
Sarcasm aside, they are never ever going to get things so close that there won't be meta builds and the people who chase them. There will always be a best option. The idea that Mythic Plus and Raid leaders aren't going to be looking for the right answer every time is just pure fantasy. And consider the balancing act involved here. 48 separate abilities across 4 covenants. And that's before the choice of Soulbind, the passives of each Soulbind that you choose and the path that you take in those talent trees, and then your own spec-specific conduits on top. All in all, it's a balancing nightmare of their own creation, and they have literally no hope at all of getting it right. Moving on.
Do you feel like it's an ideal endpoint for every hunter who is doing a Mythic Raid encounter, across the world really, to basically be the same in terms of their stats, their abilities, and the only difference among them is who can push their buttons more effectively, who can execute the mechanical aspects of their class?
Yes. So, the hunters in a Mythic Raid probably have the best possible gear, which is likely to be all the same, and the most DPS comes from the ones with the most skill. What's wrong with any of that? These Mythic Raid hunters' level of commitment to maximising their potential is going to be far greater than most WoW players, and rightly so. Realistically, how many Mythic Guild raid teams are going to take any players that have actively chosen the suboptimal Covenant ability over the one that maximizes the group's chance of success?
Because we think there is value in one person's warrior being slightly different from another person's warrior based on choices they made in terms of areas they want to specialize in. Like going back years, yeah, you needed a full separate set of tank gear from your DPS gear. Today, it's pretty much just trinkets, maybe weapons, right?
Maybe I'm reading you wrong here, Ian, but you seem to think that mashing all of the gear into one set and just switching out weapons and trinkets is a better solution. I personally disagree. I prefer building and perfecting a tank set, several actually, depending upon the content and the fight, and then slowly building a DPS set on the side. If, on the other hand, I'm mistaken, and you think that modern WoW's gear homogenization is a bad thing, well then that's on you and your design team, isn't it? It was kind of inevitable after you started to remove stats on gear that would be meaningful for specializations like parry or defense. If you'd actually like to return to that time again, please be my guest.
Part of what we've seen over the history of WoW is that friction also has positive benefits that aren't immediately apparent until that friction is removed. Going all the way back to, something like the random group finder and LFG. And sure, it's super easy and convenient to be able to push a button and have a group of group mates to run a dungeon with, but did that do some things to erode a sense of community and fellowship? Sure it did.
If you're actually serious about wanting community and fellowship back, then yes, removing the automated systems would be a good start, and I will include LFR in that. But you'd also have a larger task at hand, which would be to merge the far too many servers that you already have to create these communities. And I don't see you having the courage to do any of that, to be honest. Like flying, I think that genie is out of the bottle and sunning itself on a beach in Tahiti somewhere. WoW Classic has demonstrated the strengths of having server communities and forcing people to work together. It's a big reason why so many people are still playing it right now.
My contention is that WoW has enough, probably more than enough, ways in which you can customize your loadout going into a particular encounter. If you're about to pull a boss, you are potentially changing your spec, going over all of your talent rows, making sure that your talent choices are what you want them to be, looking at what trinkets you have equipped, or other particular gear choices within that, consumables within the Covenant system in Shadowlands, picking which soulbind you're going to use, which active branch of your soulbind you're going to have. You can be changing, a half dozen different buttons on your bar, the capabilities of your character in very meaningful ways from moment to moment. And adding an extra layer on top of that, that's not an area that needs further development, really.
If you acknowledge that there's enough complexity in preparing to do content already, then why are you adding class Covenant abilities, the soulbinds and the conduits in the first place? These layers are utterly unnecessary and complicate an already unwieldy system. Once again, personal perspective, I am sick of random procs, corruption, warforging, titan forging, additional gem slots, tertiary stats, Azerite traits, and other assorted nonsense that has affected gear in recent times. Just wipe the slate clean and make gear and best in slot simple to understand. You shouldn't need endless simming and or a maths degree to work out the value of a gear drop.
And then what trickles down throughout the community, as we've seen over time, is, well, this is the right way to play. This is the spec you should be here for this type of content. These are the talents that you should have. And if you're not, that actually, I know a lot of the anxiety that players have outside of the, cutting edge or the people who personally hate the idea of being, only 99% of optimal, of not getting the orange parse or, the gold parse. The anxiety people have is the imagined just fear that one day they're going to apply for a group, get asked what their covenant is, they're going to say Venthyr or Kyrian, and get declined and told no thanks because you picked wrong.
Ian, that's going to happen. Far more than the top 1% of WoW players will follow the metas. Why? Because they want to be the best that they can be, and they want to be able to make the best contribution to their group. They usually don't want to be intentionally suboptimal because it doesn't help them and it doesn't help those around them. I don't understand how Ian expects people to just behave differently as a result of his snowflake theory of group participation. Pug leaders are usually going to want the best comps to get the job done with minimum fuss and downtime. They're unlikely to be in the mood to accommodate your nonconformist build when there are 10 other fire mages who have spec correctly. I mean, is it just me, or is this line of thinking betraying a basic lack of understanding of the player base? On similar lines,
people are based on trying to make judgments based on limited information on a pool of applicants, whether it's a pug leader or someone trying to figure out who to bench. But when something isn't in time, when everyone knows that people had to make choices, and this is the legendary they crafted first, and they didn't craft this other one first, or this is what they got as a drop, or they didn't get this, or they chose this covenant and not that one, that doesn't necessarily imply all of those things about you, because you can't change it freely.
Well, a few things here. Firstly, we can't change it freely at the moment because that's the way you've designed it. You're in charge, remember, you can change that. Secondly, these Covenant abilities, legendaries and other meaningful choices that you're installing are going to be theory crafted out the wazoo way before Shadowlands even launches. This means that as long as you're doing your research, you should already have the right answers in your hands long before you've even started the expansion. Thirdly, and most importantly, it's a pretty big assumption on your part that the unwieldy system you've introduced will be taken into account by Pug and Raid leaders when declining or accepting people based upon their Covenant choices.
It's what spec you choose, something that you could change by pushing a button with no friction. If you're not choosing to change it in a way that makes you optimal, there must be a reason for that, is what I think the underlying mentality can often be. And that leads to people being more forced to make choices that don't necessarily align with their own personal playstyle preferences or what's fun for them because of perceived pug metas. Again, it's a nuanced aspect to it.
Yes, I absolutely agree. So why are you railroading people into it then by attaching class abilities to Covenant choice? Just bin it. Turn Covenants into a thematic and storytelling opportunity, far more than just a campaign and then you're done. Use these Soulbind characters as distinctive, complex personalities that we can connect with. Patch in story progression and content specific to that Covenant along the way. Look, I totally understand that you don't want to give up all of the work you've done so far, but it's obvious to me at least that it simply isn't going to work, or at least it's not going to work well. Salvage a few of the class-specific abilities and give them to classes directly as new flavour. Covenants will still be important, and people will be able to choose the aesthetic they want, and not the one Icy Veins says they need.
Our goal right now is to get as much feedback as possible. There's a lot of, some of the abilities that you've mentioned in this chat are some of the ones that are on our radar, and there's a lot of good discussion about others. We know we need to make significant changes to a lot of these. There's 48 different abilities across the Covenants. Some of them need to be redesigned. Some need substantial numbers tweaks. We know that, and we've left ourselves time to do that.
Have you? I'm not certain that you have, Ian. It's really not that long until the yet-determined full release. I might remind you that starts on the 22nd of September, which is just over 2 months away. And I also strongly suspect that decision in particular to launch will not be in your hands. As for the 48 abilities, well yes, granted, that's a lot. If only we knew someone who could, talk to the guy in charge. Someone who could ditch these in favour of more flexibility and actual real meaningful choices. And finally, a brighter note to finish.
Conduits. We recognize this is heading down that same path. Now, we don't want to jump to, we've seen the discussions of, hey, just make them like essences, which again are exactly in that mode right now of something you can pick per encounter, because that's a whole lot of extra stuff. It's basically, okay, before every encounter, you are now, in addition to talents, in addition to your spec, in addition to all of this, evaluating which of these many different conduits you're going to activate in each of these nodes. The game doesn't need more of that. And so we're trying to think through some middle ground where it is a semi-permanent decision. You have flexibility, but you can't change it from boss to boss. You can't, change it from dungeon to dungeon. But there isn't some overhanging tax or penalty or just really annoying thing that you're going to have to do, because we know that if that's an option, you're going to do it for the sake of optimality.
I could refer you to my recent jewellery box suggestion, Ian, but I'm also pleased that you recognise what a ball ache grinding for conduits was going to be. I also agree with making them interchangeable only at certain locations, like only in the soulbinding interface, for example. Thank you for listening and adapting accordingly. Well, that was nice. And my cocoa mug is now empty. My parting message is a sad one, however. It really does look like Ian is digging in on those Covenants and their clunky design, and the odds of getting it changed are receding by the day. We can only hope that Covenants will have changes in the same way that Conduits are going to. Anyway, that's all for me for now. Grumpy Gamer out!